Hello, everybody. This is Mark Turi. Thank you so much for coming to my live. If you're watching this, of course, uh, on the replay, thank you very much. Please remember to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I'm thinking of doing um, lives now, probably twice a week. One, I will try to do some kind of Q&A and then do another topic, which is what I will reserve for Saturdays right now. And then I was thinking Wednesdays seem to be a pretty good day to do something else here, including, again, more topics of interest that I can go into more. And I just want to say hello to Shell. Shell finally saw some of my Star Trek memes. Sometimes they don't go through, but it's good that you're here. Thank you so much for being here and supporting my channel and again liking and subscribing and everything. Your support means a lot. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I was just going through some basic stuff beforehand, which is I'm thinking that I will do some two lives a week, I think, as well as post older kind of videos throughout the week. And I'm thinking that I'll keep my ones for the week, like probably Wednesday, I think is good. I did one Thursday last week, but I think Wednesday's good right in the middle of the week, same time. For me, it's 9 p.m. Or 2100 hours. So I'm hoping, of course, that works for everyone who can come and join us. But again, you also have the replay. And I'm thinking of doing something like this where I can get into maybe more of a single kind of deep topic. And then for Saturdays, we can keep it maybe lighter. We can do a Q&A for maybe half of the time, and then we can do something to do with entertainment, like last time we did, of course, science fiction and its relation to Scientology. And so I'm thinking, oh, hey, Irish Mart, how are you? So I'm thinking, just before I get to Irish, I was thinking of doing that. So Wednesdays for the deeper issues, and then Saturdays for Q&A and maybe a lighter topic. Again, Irish Mart, thank you so much. You and Shell are becoming um, two of my big supporters. I know Chad has been on. I just want to highlight him. He was on just before we went live, almost an hour ago. So thank you, Chad. If you're watching this on the replay, again, I know with work and everything, it's also 3 p.m. where you are, so it could be hard to always make a live. But if you're watching this on repeat, Chad, thank you so much. Please, again, hit the like button. I know Shell and Irish, you've already subscribed. You probably already hit the like button. But to those who are watching this on replay, um, please do that. And of course, everyone, thank you so much for being here. And it's good to have some interaction. I'm gonna just make some small talk and some again small announcements before we delve into the topic. I'm not sure again what it's like for everyone. I know that this summer has been quite brutal as far as the temperatures are concerned and the weather. It's another really brutal hot day. I went to a library today, got some books, which was nice, in some foreign languages. And I was sweating like, to quote Homer Simpson, I was sweating like Roger Ebert. And I have a little satchel that I bring with me. And of course, I brought water. I brought a towel to wipe myself because whenever I go out like this, I just sweat so bad that sweat will come over my eyelids. I can like barely see, and sweat is salty, so it gets in my eyes, and it's whatever. And my brow is always sweaty. My nose sweats. It's really ridiculous how much I sweat. Um, so I did that and went to the library, which was thankfully air conditioned, because here where I live in Europe, um, We do have a lot of air conditioning, thankfully, but, it's can be few and far between, usually reserved to shopping malls and so forth. It's not as abundant, as in North America, where, like, there's air conditioning everywhere, especially in the US. I find in Canada, lots of air conditioning, thankfully. When I went to Australia, there's, like, especially in the hot places in Australia, I actually lived in Queensland, Australia for a year. I went to Griffith University about 10 years ago, and, one of the reasons I had to leave was because not only was there no air conditioning, but the humidity, was just brutal. I had a rough time there. Talk about sweating. It was unbelievable, and really only the shopping malls, had air conditioning, of course, on a very, very hot day, and by hot, I mean 35 to 38 degrees Celsius with humidity at, in some cases, 99%. The shopping malls would be packed with people, just chilling out the whole entire day. Yeah, sitting in the mall, walking around, going to the food court to eat. It was, yeah, it was bad going to Woolworth. I remember one of the malls was called Runaway Bay. I liked going there, and I forget the other mall that I used to go to all the time. Robina Mall was one. Anyway, if you guys know the South Queensland area, you might know what I'm talking about. If not, it's will go over your head. But I have found the weather to be pretty bad, and I'm hoping next week or the week after it starts to get normal. But it also is supposed to rain here quite a bit. So that's what I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of reading and research because I have to write my thesis again. As I mentioned before, I finished a really thick book. I do want to make a note that I'm going to, on Saturday, I am going to do a Q&A, which if nobody asks me any questions, it's fine. I'll just answer um, common questions people have, and then I will give some book recommendations on fiction books and nonfiction books that have kind of helped me along the way, and they will have a theme. If you've read these books, great. If you haven't, that's okay. If you love the books, great. If you hate the books, great. I just would love to, have some interaction with some of the ideas. And they range from, some of the stuff that I'm interested in, nothing political and nothing religious. So those to me are more private. I don't really want to get too hard on that. Like I know we'll have a diverse, a group of people here who will vote different ways. There's an election in the next couple of months in the US. I don't want anyone to feel alienated from whomever they're voting for. I, of course, have my own personal beliefs on that, but I don't want to alienate the person who, is going to vote for someone else. So none of the books are based in politics or economics or anything. It's mostly just about religion. And even when I speak about religion, it's not a particular religion. It's not promoting a particular religion. It's just the overall concepts, and you'll understand what I mean once I get there. And then when I talk about politics, of course, I'm talking about more concepts, nothing specific. So let me just go here. Let's see, Irish Mart. It rarely gets hot enough here that you need aircon. Yep. Our method of aircon is open the window. Yeah, I don't know Irish if you are in Ireland. Obviously, you don't have to be Irish to live in Ireland, and I've been told that um, the Irish diaspora, particularly in the U.S., actually outnumbers the Irish people who live in Ireland. Of course, there are immigrants who have come to Ireland within the past, whatever years, so you don't have to be ethnically Irish. But if you are, that's interesting. I always would love to go to Ireland. Um, I have a very small percentage, according to my heritage. I think I'm like 1 or 2% Irish, specifically Irish, not English, but specifically Irish. So some person or some small group of people married into my mostly Balkan and Eastern European and North African and West Asian family during the past however many years. So I feel even though I'm like 1% Irish, I still feel some connection to that beautiful island, and I've only seen photos and stuff, so I'd love to go there. But would love to, and I actually love the Irish people. I love the accent. It feels very comforting to me for some reason. Maybe you've gotten that before. I don't know. Could just be a non-Irish thing. Um, yeah, we would die here in Florida if you didn't have aircon. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The South, especially, I think air conditioning was actually invented in the South specifically. So people who work like farmers would actually stay inside more because other than that, you just would have to be outside. And of course, farming and stuff. Ooh, yep, I'm Irish born and still here. Still here. Your family would have been pretty tough, which meant that during the potato famine, they stuck it out. They didn't go to New York or Boston or Toronto or Halifax or Newfoundland or something. So I guess you got some good blood in there. They went through a hell of a lot during that famine and they stuck it out and they kept going. And that's really amazing. But yeah, one day hopefully take a nice Aer Lingus flight over to Dublin or something. Again, I don't know if you're in Ireland or Northern Ireland. Forgive me on that, but I would still love to see both Belfast and Dublin and Cork and all the wonderful stuff Ireland has to offer because it just looks like a picturesque, gorgeous, gorgeous country. So yeah, it's about 10 after. So usually around 10 after I start my stream, I sort of like to go into a little bit to introduce my topic today. And my topic is on, of course, languages and some of my history of languages and why I'm interested in it. Because if you do look at the videos that I've posted, I have a video, of course, on the origins of the Hungarian language and the history and origins of the Romanian language, which I am a historian and language history is a big interest of mine, particularly in the region that I live, which we call Central Europe, and also how it pertains to my community, the Jewish community, and also how it affects nationalism, which is a really big thing here in Central Europe. And especially empires like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where there were multiple languages across a whole spectrum, mostly Indo-European, of course, but Hungarian, which is a Uralic language, and there were people here that also spoke Latin and Romanian, of course, and Italian and Istriot and so forth, which of course are Romance languages. German of Austria is a Germanic language, and then a lot of Slavic languages, Czech and Slovak, Rusine, which is also sometimes called Ruthenian, Ukrainian, Polish, and then in the Balkans, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Slovenian. It was and that's sort of my interest is Central Europe, the Empire, and so forth. And growing up, in addition to that, just a personal note, anecdote with my family was for some of you who do know, if not, again, it's stuff I've mentioned before. Um, I live in Hungary, and I live in the country where my father and my grandparents were born. My grandparents were born in the 1920s, 1921, 1927, and my father was born just after the war in 1946. So they spoke Hungarian as their first language, of course, and they came to Canada as refugees after the 1956 revolution and finally landed in Canada in 1957, where my father had to learn English for the first time. And his first language was Hungarian. He was in school till he was 10. So I want to say until roughly, I guess, the fourth grade, maybe fifth grade. And he learned Russian, although he didn't speak it or really understand it in his adult years, he had to learn it. And then my grandparents, I don't know about my grandmother. Obviously, she spoke English. She had to learn English coming to Canada, and she did. Obviously, spoke her native language, Hungarian. But my paternal grandfather spoke Hungarian, of course, and English. And then he also spoke German and he also spoke Russian because he was older when the Russians and the Germans came in, and he learned. And my grandfather during the war was in a militia unit and actually had to learn German in order to pass as a German to do covert operations, which is a really cool thing that I don't really know 100% of the details on, but I do have some family members that told me some stories recently, and it seems to be really cool. I might, write about that, about some of his missions. And so German was something that he had to sort of be fluent in, and then learning Russian during the communist era, of course. And he worked for the government, so it was a requirement, at least in some cases. On my mom's side of the family, they're mostly from the Balkans. My mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was born in today. It's part of Greece. It's an area called Castoria, which is the Greek word, or the Slavic Macedonian word or Bulgarian word is called Castor. And at the time, he was born in 1905, which of course meant it was part of the Ottoman Empire. So his first language was what we would call Macedonian in my culture. Some people who are Greek and some people who are Bulgarian don't really like that word. So I tend to say, the language that I grew up with was Macedonian. Greeks and Bulgarians will say it's Bulgarian. So they don't really recognize Macedonia because, of course, Macedonia was a Greek Hellenic territory. Alexander, I don't believe that the descendants who live today in North Macedonia or even parts of northern Greece were descendants of Alexander the Great, but that was a nationalist claim, and on and on. It's political, it's boring, but I've heard it all my life. So then, when he was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, his family moved to Varna, which today is part of Bulgaria, but at the time was part of Romania. I don't know if my grandfather spoke Romanian, but I do know that he spoke Bulgarian and grew up in Varna from the age of 4 until the age of 25 when he immigrated to Canada. So he would have spoken at least two dialects. The one would have been the Castorian or Castor Macedonian, which he was born into, and then Varna would have spoken Bulgarian, which of course is an Eastern kind of dialect. Again, whether or not he spoke Romanian, could have, I have no idea. But throughout his life, and when he was still in Europe, he also spoke Greek. He spoke Ottoman Turkish, which is different from modern Turkish, and he also spoke Russian. So I had someone in my family who, was a couple polyglots in some ways, people who can speak multiple languages. And it was always just interesting because Hungarian is such a very interesting sounding language, and it's so different from, the other languages that are around it. And again, please refer to my history of the Hungarian and origins of the Hungarian language, which you can find here on my channel because of its migration and so forth from Siberia. But even the Macedonian language is Slavic. It's a little bit different from Russian. It's a little bit different grammatically, but of course they use the Cyrillic letters. So the Cyrillic letters, like I've been aware of them since I was a child. And my mother, although she was born in Toronto, and my my maternal grandmother was also born in Toronto, but until they went to school, their first language was Macedonian. And then eventually, when they were in school, they would, speak Macedonian at home. And then later, they would English kind of became their first language or their most used language. So I would say for my mom and dad, their second language officially would be English, although my dad has passed away 4 years ago, but he would have used, English a lot more, I think, since my grandfather passed away, and definitely more when he moved to Canada, of course, with his friends and so forth. Kept Hungarian really in the family and with close people and friends and so forth. And it's kind of the same. Um, my grandparents on my mom's side, they spoke Macedonian again in the home. They argued with each other in Macedonian. They read Macedonian. Um, they they had their conversations, but mostly when they went outside, it was English, and they were part of that generation where you didn't speak Macedonian outside of the home. You spoke English, and my mother always remembers stuff like that. If they would get in trouble when she was in grade school, in elementary school, and this is early 50s in Toronto if they were speaking Macedonian outside of the home, especially again in schools in the hallways. The teachers would pull them aside, point in their face, and say, "Speak English." But I find myself to be extremely privileged and very lucky with language. I understand deeply that to learn a language does take time. It can take money. It can take resources and stuff that maybe not everybody has. And so it can be something where, if you don't have access to that resources and information, it can be a privilege. So when I was growing up, again, I was very, very lucky that I had my mom and her family speaking Macedonian, which we always heard when they were around, and my dad and my grandparents when they would come over for big family holidays, birthdays, etc. They would be speaking Hungarian, and oftentimes in our family room, in our living room, in the kitchen, in the dining room, we'd hear both languages being spoken back and forth, and it was an interesting thing. In addition to that, um, in the 80s, my father was in business, and in the 80s, he was in the car and auto business. And for those who know the car and the auto business, it actually was very lucrative back in the 80s. So my family was able to, to do pretty well. And we were able to hire some au pairs. And the first au pair we had was a woman who came for a year or two, and I was around 2 years old. Who was from Jamaica, and of course she spoke patois, so she spoke that around us. After that came a young woman, a student. She's probably in her 20s, early 20s, from Ecuador. She spoke Spanish. Then we had an au pair from Sweden who spoke Swedish to us, and then finally we had an au pair from the Netherlands who spoke Dutch with us. And when I say us, I mean my sister and I. My sister's 4 years older than I am. So we were introduced to patois, to Spanish, to Swedish, and to Dutch. And I have very fond memories of all of those women speaking their languages. Of course, I don't really understand as much of it, but I still have some fond memories. So that takes me up to the age of about 5 years old. And of course, I grew up in Canada. And in Canada, the co-official language of our nation is French. For those out there who might be watching this live or on replay who may speak French, we of course speak a different French. We speak what's called Quebecois French, which is not the same as the standardized version of French in France, which of course comes from the dialects around Paris. Or I don't know if anyone here is from, an overseas territory, the Caribbean or so forth, where there's a bit of a different flavor of French, even in West Africa, in certain parts of Africa that still speak French. There might be an accent or a bit of a dialect, but French Canadian is quite an interesting language. Certainly, French in general, being a Romance language, is very unique because it has a lot of different pronunciations and very short words. And of course, like English, they can't spell. There's all those vowel clusters. Sometimes, E, A, U, X in French is just O, which I find funny, and so forth, like Bordeaux and so forth. And there's a lot of, interesting things there. But I learned that, and that sort of, I guess, became the language that I learned. At least I can't even remember now how many lessons we would have had each week, but it was pretty substantial, at least from when I was around 4 or 5 years old until I was in the eighth grade, so around 13. And then when I went to high school, um, I regret this, but I didn't take French through high school, and one of the reasons I regret it is for a bilingual person in Canada who speaks English and French, there are lots of opportunities in both the government and the private sector, in the financial sector, customer service, and so forth. Because for those who live in Canada or know anyone who lives in Canada, you'll know that when you call the government, when you call a bank, when you should call a shop or whatever, most public services even if they're private businesses like a bank, will have an option for English and French. So French-speaking customer service operators are you know, it's about 13% of Canadians actually speak French. So it's quite a low number, and 9% or so are in Quebec, and only 4% are outside, mostly in Ontario, but also, of course, in New Brunswick and some of the like Nova Scotia and some of the bordering what we call the maritime provinces. But you get paid a lot. You can speak French, and I kind of regret that not sticking with French. But from high school on, I mostly spoke English. Of course, every once in a while, I go to the library and pick up a copy of Teach Yourself Hungarian or something, or whatnot, and try to learn a bunch of times through high school and even through college. But then when I was 22, uh, in September of 2005, almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago, actually, this month, I moved to Poland and I worked as an English teacher. I got what's called a TESOL certificate, TESOL, teaching English to students of other languages, and I worked there in Poland for 9 months. So I received two language lessons every week. One was in Polish, and the other one was in German. So besides French, I started to learn these more as an adult. And what I learned from both of those was how, as an adult, how languages are broken down and how they work for more of an adult brain. So with Polish, which was a language that I found very difficult, and I didn't really even get to grammar. I just tried to memorize phrases that would help me, get around town and so forth and whatever, because grammar was always, there's very famously, there's cases in other languages called declension cases or noun declension cases. English doesn't have any. Hungarian has 18, which is a heck of a lot. Polish usually has 7. So I didn't really learn those, but I got a very good, um, overview of phrases and pronunciation, which I found difficult. And so that at the time was the most difficult language that I had learned. I still like it. I can still speak some Polish, not much, but like I still remember jeden, dwa, trzy, cztery, pięć, sześć, siedem, osiem, dziewięć, dziesięć. So that's 1 through 9. Thank you is dziękuję. Thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo. Proszę bardzo, if you hand someone something. Przepraszam, excuse me. Nie rozumiem po polsku. I don't understand Polish. Mówisz po angielsku. I speak English. So I still remember a little bit, a few phrases here and there. And I was able to at least understand some of it, and it's also Slavic. So growing up with Macedonian in my ear, there was words that like milk, mleko, that's the same in Macedonian as it is in Polish. Bread is chleb, it's the same, so there's a lot of overlap in vocabulary. So I was able to get into that, but still found it difficult. And then the second language that I took lessons with was German, and German was quite hard. I think it was difficult. I think one of the difficult things about German is that nouns, of course, are either masculine, feminine, or neutral or neuter, and there's no logic to what is and isn't masculine, feminine, or neuter. You just have to memorize words. The grammar, they have 4 cases, so it's not too bad, but I never really understood German, especially case languages. In Hungarian, our cases are more like suffixes, and again, please, watch the Hungarian language video if you're interested on how our grammar works in Hungarian. But I just never really got German. But the one thing that German did teach me, which is an incredible valuable lesson, which is I kind of recommend if you are an English speaker, first language English speaker, you want to learn a second language, but you want to learn a second language that will help you understand English more is German. I found after learning German vocabulary and especially German grammar that this weird amalgamation of English, whatever the heck we are, because we are very strange as far as a language is concerned, and I'll get into that in a moment. But I felt that it helped me better understand where did English come from, how did English evolve, of course, and so forth. Part of that is that English starts off its life as a mixture of three Northern German dialects, which of course was Anglish, um, Jutish, which also had some Nordic in it, and Saxonian or Sächsisch. And although the standardized German language that we learn is called Hochdeutsch or High German, and the dialects that became Anglo-Saxon were Low German dialects, I still was able to connect a lot of the dots. The other thing with English is our vocabulary is so odd. So, 58% of English vocabulary either comes from French or something called Anglo-Norman French, or it comes from Latin, which is bizarre. And then 25% is Germanic, and the rest, comes from a bunch of different languages. Karaoke is a Japanese word, robot is a Czech word, bagel is a Yiddish word. Like we really are an amalgamation. And it's very rare that a language has more than 50% um, of vocabulary that's borrowed from languages that it doesn't really descend from. But of course, French and the Normans have a massive, you know, influence after 1066. So it makes sense, but it's kind of rare. Like even in Hungarian is another rarity because only 20% of our vocabulary is actually Uralic. The rest of it does come from other languages, especially from our neighbors and from Turkish and whatever. So it's not impossible, it's just kind of rare. But, German, most of the words are Germanic. Of course, they have Latin words and Greek words for science and so forth and whatever, but it's mostly Germanic. So I would say, I can't tell someone if you want to learn another language what to learn, but if you want to, if you are have all these questions like I did on why is English so strange, what's going on with English, why you can either learn obviously the history of English, of course, that's one way, but if you want to learn a language, I would say that makes English make more sense. I would go with German. So after that, when I came back, I was around 25 in Scientology. I mentioned I joined when I was 22. So when I was in Scientology, I mentioned before that I spent 2 years as a public and a year as a staff member. So for the 2 years that I was in as a staff member for that first year, I was basically learning German. And then when I was on staff, people got fed up with me. They didn't want to speak English to me, so they started speaking German to me, and I learned German pretty quickly by the end. By the time that I was, by the time I left. Then, when I was 26 in 2009, I was actually 25, turning 26. I moved to Los Angeles, and I was starting to pick up a little bit of Spanish. And I have a kind of a connection to Spanish because of going back to that au pair from Ecuador who used to teach Spanish to my sister and I. But my family spent 5 consecutive winter holidays in Cuba, and we would get an hour of Spanish lessons at the resort. It was something that was an organized part of the day. So the adults would go off and they would do their tours and stuff. They would do all those kinds of things. So I remember my mom, my grandparents, my dad would go over, they do other things. And my sister and I and a bunch of kids would be, with the resort director. His name was Fernando. I remember him very well. He was a great, great man. Loved him very much. He was a kind, gentle-hearted man, and he would teach us Spanish. So I kind of got it in my head, I mean, I'd use it when I was in Cuba, then I'd forget it, then I'd use it again. But certainly by the time I was 10, whatever Spanish I had kind of left my system. And then I was in Los Angeles where some of it came back. And of course, I can say a lot of phrases in Spanish and whatever. But I also went to community college. I took German. Again, I took a beginner level German course just to get a language credit. so that was pretty easy. And then I would say I didn't really learn that many languages in my late 20s, early 30s. Again, I tried to pick up Hungarian again. I tried to learn German again. Like I tried to learn French again. Like little things that just didn't take. And then finally, when I was an undergrad, I took a bunch of different courses for different languages. I actually, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I took Dutch lessons for a few months. I took Czech lessons for 6 months. And then finally, 4 years ago, during or 4.5 years ago, during the pandemic in March of 2020, I thought, you know what? I'm going to learn Hungarian. And I've been learning Hungarian now for almost, well, 3.5, almost 4 years. I've lived here in Hungary for 3 years. And I spent my first year here in Hungary uh, learning Hungarian at a language school 3 days a week for 4 hours. And as hard as it is, I'm very lucky and very happy that I can converse. So even though my grandparents and my dad have passed away, I could still today converse with them in a conversation. I also was able to converse with older relatives that were cousins and so forth of my grandfather. So, they were 60 plus and so forth. And, I was able to converse with them and have conversations with them, which is really, really helpful because that was a goal of mine. And so I was able to do that. And just before I go on a little bit more, I want to acknowledge Joe Giuseppe, my friend here. Buonasera, guten Abend, buonanotte. What's that last one? Must be Farsi, no? Shabbat Kehir. What's the last two? Boa notte. Is that Esperanto? And then Shabbat Kehir. I'm going to guess that's Farsi. Of course, Buonasera, Romanian. Guten Abend, of course, is German. But yeah, again, I've been very lucky. I've had the resources, I've had the time, I've had the money, to be honest with you, to learn a language and so forth. Oh, it's Portuguese. Okay. Okay. Portuguese for me is, I know nothing about it. Yeah, good to see you, Joe. Portuguese is one of those where the sound is weird, man. Sound is weird. Esperanto is bonan vesperan. Bona vesperan. Esperanto is an interesting language. Let me say that here. Hi, back there. Thanks for being here, Joe. I'm just getting onto my studying when I've been here in Budapest. So for the replay, I've just gone literally all to my language history and so forth. Oh yes, the last one was Farsi. Final one was Farsi. Yay! Farsi is one of those languages because of the alphabet. Like I would be tempted to learn how to speak it, but that writing system is bizarre for me anyway. Right? It's a it's a okay. So then it's Shab Bechair. Shab Bechair. Maybe I've got that wrong. My chuz, I haven't really learned much Hebrew or other chuz except German. Of course, they say cha quite a bit. Um, but then I moved to Budapest 3 years ago. It's going to be my third year anniversary is actually just in a couple days. And other than learning Hungarian, when I started my, let me see here what you say. Oops, pretty close. I'll take it. I'll take pretty close. Um, I when I started my program, which was 2 years ago in September of 2022, I had to pick a language for my master's degree, and I could have chosen between Czech, Slovak, Ukrainian, Polish, Serbian, Croatian, Slovenian, or Romanian. And I said I had learned Polish before. It was hard. I had learned Czech before. It was hard. So then Slovak was out of there. Ukrainian, I thought would have been interesting, but then I would have had to have learned another alphabet, even though, again, I know Cyrillic, at least to some extent. Serbian was actually my second choice because of it, being in Yugoslavia when I was a kid, Serbian was also something that we heard a lot. And then Croatian could have been interesting because they used Latin alphabet, and it's very close to Serbian, although don't if anyone asks, Serbian and Croatian are different languages. And then Slovenian, which wasn't on my radar, even though I heard it's also kind of a hard language. Yes, and this is the Farsi Arabic alphabet. God bless people who can read that. It's the same with Hindi, Georgian, and Japanese and Mandarin. I mean, God bless you guys, who can read that stuff. I wish I could. It's just to me, those alphabets are tough. Yeah. Hard stuff for me anyway, right? I mostly only know either alphabets that are either Latin, Cyrillic, or Hebrew, and those are not very difficult actually. Hebrew's not terribly hard to learn, and Cyrillic is really not that bad either. But I picked Romanian because Romanian is considered to be easier. It's tricky. Romanian, I like it a lot, but I won't be studying it any further because I've switched topics to learn other things. And so I did learn Romanian for 4 semesters. I didn't really understand it and I didn't really get a good grasp on it. Another reason too is some languages like this, right? Some languages like English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, they're Italian. There's so much learning that can be done. There's so many books. There's so many novels. There's so many, on apps on Duolingo and whatever. Like they gear towards these languages where tens of millions of hundreds of millions or a billion people will speak it because on an app like Duolingo, people are going to learn Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese or Russian or Japanese or Mandarin or whatever. But like Romanian, there's like hardly anything. Even Hungarian, there's being in Hungary, I have opportunity. But even when I went to Romania, I found it difficult, other than to buy like fiction books and children's books. It was even hard to find like good grammar books that teach English speakers or speakers of other languages Romanian because there's not much going on. So, I mean, I could probably, I was in like my final class was like a B2 class, but I wasn't really learning much. And the grammar I thought was pretty hard because they have 5 cases. And again, cases don't make much sense to me. I used to be able to read the Georgian alphabet. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Georgian. That is one heck of a language. They do the double consonant things where they say like ha and ka at the same time. It's amazing. I love those Caucasian languages. They're so beautiful. If you know the Hebrew, Arabic has a lot of similarities. Okay, yeah, I do know. I mean, I know the grasp of Hebrew. When I was 25, I had a bar mitzvah, so I had to learn Hebrew reading. So I took a course over 4 or 5 months at my synagogue, and I mean, at that time, it took only a few weeks or only a month or two for me to actually know it, but I haven't practiced it. So I still know the characters and I still understand it. So yeah, but I love Hebrew as far as reading. I could only read the Georgian. Yeah, yeah. Pronunciation in Jordan, again, the double consonants. It's a very unique thing that they do. They're also agglutinative. So they have those ending like we do in Hungarian, although I don't know exactly how they do it, but they are an agglutinative language. So, they probably descend from a pre-Proto Indo-European language, but again, nobody really knows. So some people say Basque and Georgian have something in common. I don't think so, but that would be kind of cool if it did. Also, some people think Hungarian and Georgian have in common. They probably don't, but it's cool to think about. Maybe they do. Who knows? Um, but yeah, their grammar, their pronunciation on Georgian is something, and I think it's kind of cool. I'd love to go to Georgia one day as well. Lots of beautiful mountains. But I in the last what 2 to 3 months, I've picked up Spanish again, and I did a placement test the other day, and I'm at the upper level of the A2, and that's from studying for 3 months. Now, of course, I have a background, so that helps, right? I knew how to read Spanish. So the first lesson of going through each letter in the alphabet, how it's pronounced, they didn't need to do that. Basic phrases, buenos dias, muchas gracias, ¿cómo estás? We didn't need to do that. So I sort of started at a sort of an upper A1 level. And I've been doing 2 lessons for 2 hours a week with the Spanish teacher. And my goal, I hope I can do this, is to get a B2 exam sometime next year, sometimes by next spring. And with that, I can go into my doctorate course because that was one of the reasons was for my doctorate course was they said you need a B2 language exam and that's not in English. So you need to speak another language. And Romanian wasn't going to do it for me, and Hungarian, even though I am at the B2 level, um, the B2 even Hungarian exam is really tough. So because I have this already background of Spanish, I've been doing Spanish again and Castilian Spanish. So we say things like cerca, cielo, Barcelona, Ibiza. And whenever I speak it to my South American friends, because there are a lot of South American friends who live here, I have a lot of friends from Argentina and from Venezuela, from Mexico, and so forth. They find it very annoying when people have the Z or the Z pronouncing as a th sound. So Barcelona, Zaragoza, and so forth. And they tease me for it. Let me see here, Joe. Have you ever heard of the Basque Icelandic pigeon? Really? Icelandic pigeon. It evolved among fishermen in the 17th century, and only one book survived. Really? I can't imagine Basque and Icelandic. I mean, I get it because you just said that they are a fisherman, and the Basque actually used to fish in eastern Canada. They used to fish our salmon, but of course they were under the Spanish banner. So the Spanish probably discovered our Atlantic salmon. That's something we learned, and they were Basque fishermen. The Basque and Icelandic. Uh, okay, that's amazing. That's really amazing. Pigeons are also very interesting. Okay, yes, yeah. Pete, programming languages are very interesting too. He says, I know assembly, basic, visual basic, C, C++, COBOL, is it PHP, SQL, etc. But the computer doesn't talk back to me in the same way. That's a good joke, Peter. I like that. Yeah. Listen, coding is language. People say music is language, math is language. There's a lot. I have a friend who turned me on. I was going to do it. I don't know why, it's just for a skill, but who turned me down onto Python because it's a pretty easy one to use. And I actually did something. I actually created some small, it's like the first lesson. I don't remember what I did now, but it's like you probably know in programming language, you enter all these different commands and then you have that result where it's some kind of graphic or some kind of movement or whatever. So I did this one lesson unit and I created like I think it was like a box or something, and something falls out of the box. It was something rudimentary, and I was just like, "Yeah, okay, I get it." And I just never went back because that's all I wanted to do was just to learn the basic programming to do some rudimentary 3D stuff. I did it. It took a few hours, and I was proud of myself. There we go. Hey, Pete. So that was cool, and I hear Python's pretty easy, so that's why I asked a programmer friend of mine. He said, "Yeah, Python." And, yeah, I think it was a box that went into a box or fell out of a box. I don't even remember. This was probably, 3, 4 years ago. Um, but yeah, so, what did I learn from learning other languages, which is also a big topic that I wanted to talk about today. One of the interesting things about learning another language is there is some research that is, um, sort of around there, and again, if someone has another perspective on this, but but it seems like language is really, really good for changing people's perspectives and worldviews. Um, it changes your brain cognitively. Some people say it can reduce stress, increases cognitive functions, and may or may not. Again, who really knows? It could be correlation and not causation. but it could reduce the risk of getting like dementia and stuff like this or memory loss and whatever, because your brain is really working overtime when you're learning another language and when you speak that other language. And I know this very, very, very simply from learning Hungarian because of this agglutinative grammar, which is just the structure is so different from English that when I'm speaking Hungarian, everything is just in a different world. You know, my speech patterns, my thought patterns, how I put things together. It's constructed like, like a sculpture, like a math equation, like a bunch of Legos. And I mean, it really does change. And then I also feel that when you speak a language, especially if you have someone who's meaningful in your life, a spouse, a family member, a friend, or whatever, who might speak a language, you get to know a culture. You can get to know, the history of a particular country, culture together, a people group. So it's a really big appreciation to learn a different language. And there's always good motivations. So if someone has a romantic partner that happens to speak a second language, speaking with them and their parents of your romantic partner, that could be a big motivation. I know for me it was my grandparents. Always wanted to speak Hungarian with my grandparents. Unfortunately, I didn't get that opportunity, or with my dad, but I did with other relatives. So when I did that, when I got that chance, and the relative said I spoke good, they understood me, and it was really nice. It was a great motivator. And for me, for now, for Spanish, is to get into my PhD class and to relearn a lot of things as I get older, because I have a lot of good memories of the Ecuadorian au pair and of Cuba. And I would really also have a motivation because there's a lot of Spanish speakers who are friends, who are students, again, from Argentina, from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Mexico. Um, and I really want to speak, I really would love to speak to them because they speak Spanish when we get together for student group meetings and student events. And, I always am in that um, culture through osmosis. And, I would like to, learn more and communicate. So Pete says, I made a basic program that built pixel by pixel the American flag. Okay. My friend helped me with notes and played the anthem. That is so cool. That's a lot of fun. Which program and which language was that, Pete, if you don't mind me asking? My friend married a Venezuelan and she talks about him with her parents in Spanish and he refuses to learn. I would learn. And that's a good motivator too. I don't know if any of you are Seinfeld fans, but Frank Costanza, played by the late great Jerry Stiller, is a veteran of the Korean War who did business selling religious tchotchkes in South Korea. And Elaine and him go to a Korean manicure pedicure salon because Elaine knows that the Korean ladies who are doing the manicure pedicures are talking bad about Elaine, and Frank goes with her, and whatever. So it's one of my favorite episodes. And by the way, that's a good motivator too. That's a really good motivator. The floor is lava. Citizens of, yeah, basic. Okay, yeah. That episode, isn't it? I mean, just to figure out what other people are saying about you is it's hilarious because they probably are, right? Oh my God, he was a Moonie actually. I think Frank sold figures of a Reverend Sung Young Moon. I think is the guy's name. Another cult leader. Anyway, I'm diverging, but I'm digressing. But yeah, it's just one of those things that whether or not some of these claims are true about cognitive functions and reducing, whatever memory loss, helping you sleep better. I mean, you hear a lot of these things. It doesn't, it whatever. If it's possible, if you have the resources. And I also say, okay, yes, it is very much easier to learn a language when you're younger. But I started learning Hungarian 4 years ago, so I'm 41. So I was 37 years old. So it's not like I was a spring chicken or anything. I mean, I'm in my early 40s now, and I'm still attempting to learn languages, which anybody can do. And there's also be certain methods. So I, for example, I'm weird. I love grammar. And that's one of the things that I learned while learning all these different languages that I previously mentioned, is I love the structure of a language. Some people will say that you shouldn't learn grammar first, you should learn vocabulary. Certainly, if grammar is not your thing, then learn the top 500 or 1,000 vocabulary words, or maybe 300, I think you start with, and then go to 600 and whatever, then kind of learn the structure after. That might also, because a lot of times when you learn a new language, especially in school, and here's the thing about French that I mentioned, in the first grade, when students are 6 years old, 5 and 6 years old, okay, in Canada, in the curriculum where I lived in the Toronto suburbs, we were learning French grammar. We were learning how to conjugate like verbs, like je suis and tu es. I am, to be, je suis, I am, tu es, you are, etc. And whatever. And like you don't need to do that when you're 6 years old. You need to learn vocabulary, and you need to learn through songs, and you need to learn through children's books and so forth. So it turned a lot of people away like me from French. Plus the pronunciation is difficult. It's not an easy language pronunciation wise. So that's my thing. So learn vocabulary, and from there you can learn the structure, of a language. Makes sense. Keeping the brain active is, yep, healthy way. Helps to delay the onset of dementia. Yeah, I do Sudoku, and I really love cryptograms. Those are my favorite. I had a whole book of cryptograms, and unfortunately here, because they're mostly in Hungarian, I don't do any cryptograms anymore. But I had this book called Sherlock Holmes Cryptograms, and what's that guy's name? Edgar Allan Poe cryptograms, and kind of weird gothic kind of cryptograms, and really kind of stuff like that. I love it, and I love Sudoku. So you're absolutely correct. Doing puzzles, doing that, and even if you have a phone, downloading Candy Crush and other kind of games like that, which help your thinking skills, will help your memory and so forth as well. So yeah, that's a really, really good suggestion. Yeah, what are my tips for learning a language? First is motivation. So, like I said, maybe you have a family member, a loved one, a friend who speaks a language. Go from there. You have an Italian grandfather. You want to speak Italian with your grandfather? Learn Italian. The motivation is number one, right? Your partner is from Iran or Venezuela or Philippines or whatever. A wife, a husband, a partner, whatever term that you use, girlfriend, boyfriend, etc. And you want to communicate with them and their parents, learn that language, because that will keep you going back every day, because every single language has easy stuff that's actually easy, and things that are hard. And the easy stuff is easy. I mean, even in Spanish, okay, a lot of vocabulary overlaps. In Hungarian, very thankfully, we only have a neutral, like neuter nouns, which is great. So like English, all of our nouns are just the, you know, it's fantastic. In Hungarian, which again is a very difficult language, but we only have three tenses. English has 13, like these kinds of things. In Spanish, I love the vocabulary. I love reading. Some of the grammar is a bit difficult. We have reflective verbs, and sometimes word order is a little different, which I'm finding to be challenging. But again, that's where you're gonna get motivated. You're gonna be motivated every single day. I also know Irish. I don't know if you can comment if you've ever learned Gaelic, because that language like that, for example, is a language that was horrifically oppressed. And if you look at where Gaelic was 200 years ago, people spoke it throughout Ireland, and now it's in corners of Western and Northwestern and Southwestern Ireland. What's motivating people to learn languages like Gaelic and also other languages that were oppressed, like Quechua in Peru, is because of a connection of their deep roots, your family roots, which is what I'm doing with Hungarian. And so that motivates me every day, because I'm connected to something that is a history and a culture that, for me, again, very different. Hungarian, we have a nation, we have our language. A language like Gaelic has been really oppressed and driven out. Also, if anyone here has indigenous heritage, very similarly, many indigenous languages in North and South America are having revivals, like Quechua, like Nahuatl, many like Cherokee, Navajo, and it's because younger people are being more connected to their roots of who they really are. And of course, English is now, on one hand, the world's lingua franca, but it also was a language that did oppress a hell of a lot of people around the world, from India to Australia to Asia to Africa, and of course to the Western continent. But we still use it. I mean, English is still my first language. It's still the most universal language in the world. So pragmatically, we speak it. We're connecting here. But if there's another culture that you have, and if there's another connection that you have to something that is indigenous, or is a like a Celtic language, I guess you could say is indigenous. I would say to some degree. I'm not really sure about the history of Ireland, but maybe we could call it indigenous, or a language that was in demise that's now being resurrected to some extent. I think that's a really, really good motivation. So that's number one. And then number two, learn the vocabulary. However, if you're like me and you love grammar, then go with grammar. I mean, I know that not a lot of people like it because it's the hardest, but that's how I say, just jump in. Understand that you have to start as a beginner. So when you're watching movies, when you're collecting books, when you're reading things, just start simple. Learn the basic phrases. Phrase books to me, I would only use a phrase book if you're traveling somewhere. But if you want to learn a language, you can go to a bookstore or a store online, and you can just write in the name of a language, whatever it is, Spanish, Italian, Hungarian, whatever, and just put A1 level. Because of course, every language has a corresponding letter and number, and always the beginning level is A1. So if you find a book that's expensive, that's like a textbook or something, maybe it comes with a CD, or you can download audio for lessons and so forth, and you take it from there. You start from scratch and you move on one after another after another. But again, it also depends on you, because I think learning, for some people, just learning the first like 300 words, basic words and phrases, will get you motivated to then learn about the structure. If you're me, and again, you're a structure fan, then you do structure first, which is just how you think and so forth. How do you say, my hovercraft is full of I get that. I get that reference. Also, you have a lovely body. If I told you you have a lovely body, would you hold it against me? I will translate that, by the way. So first of all, I'm laughing because that is from a very classic sketch called The Hungarian Phrase Book by the wonderful, talented, amazing Monty Python. John Cleese plays a Hungarian man um, who moves from Hungary to England and doesn't speak any English, so he has a phrase book, and the phrase book says these really fun, unbelievable non sequiturs, like "My hovercraft is full of eels," and "If I told you you had a lovely body, would you hold it against me?" And of course, John Cleese's character, who doesn't really do a terrific Hungarian accent, but that's not the point, goes to court, and hilarity ensues. That is absolutely a deep cut. So if we really want to know how to say that in Hungarian, a legbachnas hajom tele van anglónával. I'll say it again. A legbachnas hajom tele van anglónával. And in Spanish, mi aerodecita dor está lleno de anguilas, or anguilas. I always pronounce the U. I'll say it again. Mi aerodecita dor está lleno, or lleno, de anguilas. There you go. We learn a lot here on My Lives. I've been taught that I have a lot of insight, and I want to say this is the height of my insight. There's nowhere to go from there. One of the frustrating things I do find about Spanish is when they have a QU, an I or QUE. I always want to say qui and que, but it's key and K, which is what I do here. That's just an instinct. And of course, H is never pronounced as the beginning of a word, but of course I pronounce it sometimes, like I say hoy instead of oi. So, that's a little frustrating because of course my English brain is reading and it's hard to turn off sometimes. But thank you so much. So, yeah, that's really my thoughts today. Is what did I learn from learning other languages? Which is that if you really want to connect to a culture, if you really want to understand a people, even ancient peoples, there's ancient Greek, there's ancient Hebrew, there's Latin, there's all kinds of ancient languages people learn. Assyrian has been around for a very long time, for example. So there's also really good. But if you really want to understand a group of people, their culture and how they thought, the process in which they think, why are they like the way that they are? Verbal language, grammar, syntax, phonology, vocabulary, structure, conjugation, so forth does um, really help. And so if that motivates you to learn, if you're of a certain age, by the time I guess if you're in your 30s, you probably know, and if you're older than that, you know how you learn. And if you know how you learn, you'll know what the best step is for you, which, as I said, for me is grammar. I just love it. I don't know why. It's the weirdest thing that I love, the most challenging, complicated thing about a language, and that's what I love first. Se entiende español, entiende mucho portugués. Yeah. I think, yeah. So I've heard that Portuguese, especially European Portuguese, the pronunciation is a little weird. It's kind of reminds me of French, where like it's just kind of odd and it just doesn't sound right. I don't know. It's like to me, Spanish and Italian flow a little bit more. Of course, Romanian's still a Romance language, has more of the Slavic accent and influence. So that's a different thing. But there's something with French and Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese, I think, is a softer accent. And I also do know a lot of people from Brazil who speak Brazilian Portuguese, Hungarian, and of course, they also speak Spanish. So maybe in the future, I'll learn some Brazilian Portuguese, but I don't know. I would like to be motivated. I don't really have the motivation in Portuguese or French, but I do definitely for Spanish because I love it. It's a nice language. The other thing I want to mention before we go, because it's uh, about time to wrap up, because I usually like to do about an hour, and we're at an hour seven. Is there is something called the Foreign Language Institute. So if English is your first language, I understand it's not everyone's first language, but if it happens to be your first language, you can Google an image which puts many languages of the world into five categories. And if English is your first language, category one, which is considered to be the quote unquote easiest, although again, easy is relative, but the category one languages that would be considered the easiest to learn for native English speakers are Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Dutch, and then French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian. So if that helps, if there's a connection that you might have with your family, a loved one, a friend, those might be worth looking into. The next one is category two. It only contains German. And as I mentioned before, German is a language that if you're just curious about English, I think it's worth it. Category three is Indonesian, Malay, and Swahili. And then category four is a lot of languages, including the Slavic languages. So anything from Serbian, Croatian, Macedonian, Bulgarian, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Czech, etc. Also Turkish and the Turkic languages, Armenian, Greek, Albanian, Hebrew, and so forth. And then it also includes languages like Hungarian and Vietnamese, Thai, Mongolian, and then finally category 5, which is Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, and Korean. Now, I actually do know someone who speaks fluent Japanese, who's at the highest level of Japanese. He's been studying it and speaking it for over 30 years. He also can read and write it. So, and he was born and raised in Canada. He's Anglo-Canadian. We say English background Canadian. And when he was a teenager, he just really wanted to learn Japanese. He is married to a Japanese woman. So he was motivated. And even he, after 30 years, was able to learn. So it's not impossible. Last one here. Let's say Julie mentioned Auto Legal. Yeah. She's from Brazil, so of course she speaks Brazilian Portuguese. But I want to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone who's on. We had 5 to 6 viewers, which again doesn't sound like much, but I want to say thank you to everyone who made it to the end. If you haven't liked the video, please like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please subscribe. And I will be back on Saturday evening at 9 p.m. my time, which is 3 p.m. on the Eastern American time zone, which is noon if you're on the Pacific coast. And of course, it's around 8 o'clock if you live in the UK. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to be I'm going to be doing a little question and answer. I'm going to make some questions for myself to answer, but I'll also take questions if you have any. And then we're going to talk about some books. I've got 8 books that I am going to recommend to you all. If you've read them before, great. Tell me what you think of them, positive or negative. If you haven't, I'm very, very interested in your thoughts. I do like pushback. So if you disagree with something I said or whatever, be respectful. Let me know in the comments. Let me know uh, at all and just be respectful. And uh, I will respond in Irish. It's always great. You've been doing a lot of commenting. Thank you so much for watching my videos and commenting. Mulțumesc, vielen Dank. I'm going to attempt this one. Kirill Mam Unam. I don't know. That butchered it. I'm so sorry. Great live. Thank you. Danke. Obrigado. And muchas gracias, mis amigos. Me amo Mark Turi. And this was my live. So thank you so much. And enjoy very much enjoy your evening, your afternoon, and whatever else. And I'll see you Saturday. Thank you.